Today, we're joined by Mateo, co-founder of Cometa, an edtech startup building the financial operating system for private schools across Mexico. Before launching Cometa, Mateo began his career in investment banking at Jefferies, then joined RapidSOS, where he helped scale international operations. After earning his MBA at Stanford, he teamed up with fellow classmates to found Cometa with a mission to modernize school payments and operations. Backed by top-tier investors like Kashek, Homebrew, and Acre Capital, Cometa is now serving hundreds of schools and shaping the future of education infrastructure in Latin America. In this episode, we dive into Mateo's path from finance to entrepreneurship, why the team prioritized solving collections as their first product, how he balances simplicity and sophistication in product design, the challenges of selling to fragmented markets like K to 12 private schools in Mexico, and much more. Hey, Mateo, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for making the time.
Hey, Mac. Great to meet you. Well, great to see you on video for once.
I know we're long overdue for a chat in person or coffee in the near future.
Yeah. We'll make it happen in Mexico
Yes,
City.
awesome. So I always like to give some context. I appreciate it. I think last year when I first reached out to you, you made the time to cover Cometa and what you guys are doing. And it's really interesting to me. And I know it's a problem dear that to your heart that you're solving. So I'm excited to dive into it today. But before we get into that, I always want to know a little bit about the background of who I'm speaking with and the founder. Did you always know you wanted to be a founder? Did you always know you wanted to be in education? And we can go from there.
Yeah. The quick answer to that question is no. I did not know I wanted to be a founder. I think it sounded so intimidating. It's one of those things that you see other founders, you see how much they pour their heart and soul, and maybe from the outside in, you think, wow, that looks crazy, right? And for me, one of the things that really helped me get there was a mentor of mine, Michael Martin, who's the CEO of RapidSOS. It's a company I used to work at. He sat me down one day and said, "You're going to be a founder one day. I want to help you get there." And he really followed through with that. A lot of people say they might believe in you, but then don't actually follow through. He put his money where his mouth is. He was the first check in Cometa. He was a mentor for the MBA process when I was there, helping me think about what I wanted to do next. And I always call him if I need to really think through a problem. So that was really helpful. I think, not every founder knows they're going to be a founder from the get-go. Some people just wake up one day and say, I'm going to do this, and other people need a mentor to believe in them. But I think once you are bought in, you have to go all in, and you can't tread that fine line of I'm a part-time founder. That's just so hard to do. You just have to take the leap and take the plunge into the cold water once you've decided.
And what did Michael say to you when that gave you this confidence? Did he say, "I know that you have the qualities," or what did he say?
It's a great question. I remember we were at our offsite, just having a ton of fun. And, at the time, I always knew I was a high achiever, but I didn't believe in myself to think I could create something from nothing. And he sat me down and said, look, at the time, I was actually thinking about applying to business school. I was maybe my first year in. And he sat me down and said, I don't think you should go to business school yet. I think I can teach you so much more first. And I think that when you do go to business school, I want you to be really ready because you're going to found a company one day. Like everything about the way you work tells me that you have it in you, and I want to help you get there. So just let's work together. I want to be as close to you as possible. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I ended up applying a year later and got into the places I wanted to get into, but it was such a big shift in mindset because that next year I just was so focused on learning the things I needed to do, growing exponentially, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting comment because we're going to get to that later. Who's had the biggest influence? Maybe there's some other people. And I was going to ask you about his leadership, but it looked like it's pretty top tier and spot on. So let's take a step back. You graduate from Columbia, and then you went into investment banking. And at that point, why did you choose this path? Did you think this would be for the long term? I know eventually you had this opportunity to work at RapidSOS.
Mhm.
And was there skill sets that you still use today? Many of us or people listening will know about investment banking, but maybe not the inside.
Yeah, so my journey was a little bit start stop start stop. So I did an internship in banking like most college juniors do that go into banking, and then I graduated early, figured out what I needed to do that spring semester was try something different. Worked at a startup. It actually was RapidSOS. Had the opportunity to stay at RapidSOS. Michael wanted me there, and I said, you know what? I'd already accepted my full time offer. I'm going to commit to that. So I did a year of banking, and then eventually decided this wasn't for me. And to answer your question of why banking, I studied financial economics, was curious to learn about how financial systems impacted the economy. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career yet. And I thought two things: this is the best route to learn as many skills and have as much exposure as I can at an entry level role. And secondly, it's going to keep a ton of open doors for me. I'm going to work with CEOs, CFOs, see how they think. But it wasn't something I wanted to do long term, and that's something I was able to figure out along the road.
Yeah. So we've been hinting at it. So we'll just dive right in. So Rapid SOS, from my understanding, it's basically this software that allows more of like emergency services to be more transparent through different platforms, public services and private. You can explain it better than I can, but it seems like it's had a huge impact on your career, that experience.
It has. So when I started as an intern, the founders had just graduated from Harvard Business School and MIT, and they started as a B2C app. So what they were trying to sell was to consumers: here's a better way to get to 911 faster, quicker, et cetera, with real time data. And when I was there as an intern, I was working with Michael on trying to build out partnerships with insurance companies and a lot of other companies. We said we'll integrate your SDK in here, and we realized is nobody wanted that. What they wanted was their data to get to 911. So they pivoted over time, right around the time I had left and gone back to banking, to become a B2B company. And it is a software, but there's two components. There's like a data warehouse for all this data to transmit through, and then there's a software for 911 agencies. And what's really interesting about them is that they don't monetize the 911 side, so they don't charge government; they charge companies to send their data. But going back to how impactful it was to me, I think I was in banking. I was feeling really unfulfilled. You're working on all these incredible projects, high velocity, et cetera, but you put your heart and soul into something, and then the IPO happens or the acquisition happens, and then you just move on to the next thing. And I felt like I was missing something, a mission. So with Rapid SOS, I was able to find that mission pretty early on, and I think I learned what it means to be mission obsessed. So it sounds a bit absurd, but the experience was really exhilarating. It was I got to work on all the fundraising from seed to Series B. That initial pivot I mentioned, partnerships with Apple, Google, Uber, to just get this out to everybody. And then eventually my big project, or my big growth experience, came when I was tasked with figuring out the expansion strategy. So I looked at a ton of regions, countries. Mexico became something very important to us over time. And I had no idea what I was doing, no connections, but you figure it out as you go. And yeah, exactly. And we were able to just get that going, with state governments, with the major telecom companies, with our existing partners in the US, bring it down. And I saw the impact, just one or two people could have with technology in an underdeveloped region. So it inspired me a lot afterwards to keep exploring Mexico. And
And some would say, like, at that point, it could easily have been you stay there for another 5, 10 years,
yeah.
grow the company, and be potentially like the country manager or some type of COO role of LATAM. And you still left, and it's like you
Mhm.
had it great. So at this point, you decided, I want to go to the MBA. Why? Did you always know that was, hey, I need to do this, I need to get more skill sets?
Yeah, no. So the first time I was thinking about it, I hadn't applied yet. I was just following the path of high achievers that a lot of people do, and I wasn't really thinking through my steps. That year where Michael had told me pause for a second, think this through, was really helpful. And I ultimately came down to two reasons. I said I don't want an MBA, but I do want to go to Stanford to get an MBA. And and I said two reasons. Yeah, and I would highly recommend Stanford to anybody. But my reasons were interpersonal development. There's this famous class called Touchy Feely. You just if you put your heart and soul into it, you're going to grow exponentially in the interpersonal side of things. I was learning a ton of skills in a very high output, high performance type of place, but that interpersonal development is something you're only going to get over many years in the traditional, career ladder. And I got that in too. And then the other one is I just wanted to surround myself with founders, product leaders, just generally really impressive people that were in the tech capital of the world. Stanford gave me that opportunity. So that was amazing. I mean, there's also the benefit of just having time to
To
reflect, think,
reflect,
and
yeah, think what's next. No, and
exactly.
you were there at Rapid SOS for a while, so it does
Mhm.
make sense. And when you say there's like this draw to Stanford, you even see people that are not even going to the MBA programs that are doing these, I should say, like professional education, professional development, and
Mhm.
they think it's impactful. So I can only imagine this experience for you. So this is where you end up meeting your potential two co-founders. When you meet them, they ended up having this similar background and interest, right, in education, and it seemed pretty organic. Is that how it happened?
It was very organic. I knew Andres and Gonzalo tangentially. They were my classmates, but I wouldn't say that we were hanging out frequently. I'd play soccer with Andres, and Gonzalo and I would see every now and then. But Andres was really the one that brought us together. He and Gonzalo were hosting a series of these really cool gatherings with founders and investors from LATAM. They had a fun name for it, Ideas Chingonas y Chelas. So, it was just like, let's drink some beers and hang out. And it was like an informal entrepreneurship club for the LATAM classmates in our year and the year below and above. So he came from an entrepreneurship background. He had founded a coding bootcamp in Peru before Stanford. And then Gonzalo came from the world of fintech and was really just all in on, let me build fintech for LATAM, but I want to do it for specific industries. Andres knew I was working on startup ideas in edtech, and I'd also been working at Duolingo. And he said, I want somebody that's obsessed with education like me. What we didn't realize, and probably the first time we sat down, the three of us together, is we all come from education backgrounds. Like we all come from families of educators. So that also helped us just really go all in on what we wanted to do eventually. Exactly.
I didn't have this in what I was thinking. I'm going to take an opportunity to just dive in, but Duolingo is like amazing, like from the content side. I've been blown away, and I don't think anybody competes with them. Was there something that you took away from that short time as an intern from maybe the marketing side? Because everybody talks about it. Everybody. And it's like not that impressive. It's an app that you learn a language, you know?
Yeah,
It's like cult following.
it's a cult following, and while I didn't work on the marketing side, I worked on monetization. I could see it tangentially. Gina Gottlieb, who used to be at Latitude, she really started a lot of that. And when I was there, and I could see what the marketing team was doing, I think there were probably a couple of things that were really interesting. The first is that they weren't. It's not as ROI obsessed as you would think it is. It's like we know that these things are going to contribute long term. So, and that's actually one of their values. It's all about thinking about the long term vision and the long term where we want to get to in 5 or 10 years. Like, you don't need to optimize every single little thing, which was actually interesting because the product team was very focused on optimizing every single little thing. But on the marketing side, they knew what they were doing, and then secondly, they were just really good at having a grasp of what the culture was asking for. So they had very unique campaigns per region, and it wasn't like we're going to do this one thing in the US and we're just going to apply it elsewhere. They would say, we're doing a specific campaign that's only for Japan, and we're going to go all in on this one thing that Japanese people love. And then the German team was doing something completely different, and all of that just worked so seamlessly.
And I know it was B2C, and Cometa is B2B and continues to be in the future. From the EdTech side, was there something that you were like, oh, this is something I can take as I pursue potentially this opportunity in the future? Because EdTech does have some parallels.
Yeah. It's tough because, like you said, they're very different business models, very different businesses. But I think at the end of the day, it goes back to what I said with Rapid SOS. It's about being mission obsessed. Everyone there at Duolingo really was mission obsessed. They wanted to democratize access to language learning, and now they've expanded beyond language learning to other things. So, we were on the monetization team, and we would often have these discussions within the team. And Jorge, who was the CPO at the time, and Jem, who was the head of monetization now is the current CPO, really thought carefully of how do we build monetization to Duolingo without hurting the brand and hurting the learning experience. And so there's very different areas within the company, but they're always speaking to each other. And you have to make sure. I think probably the number one thing that I learned at Duolingo in that front is have your guardrail metrics, right? So what's important to you? Okay, we want to make sure that learners are still learning, so we got to make sure monetization is not impeding that, right? We're not a learning company, at least not today, but I think that the mission side is very important. And then from a product side, we do have certain guardrail metrics that we always want to look out for, right?
Great. So we'll get into it now. I think it'd be great for you to first share what Cometa is, how the initial vision was, and then eventually we can get into why you ended in Mexico and so forth.
Yeah. So I'll try to be brief here on what Cometa is, and then let you lead from there. Our mission is we want to increase access to quality education. We believe that we can make that easier by helping schools open and grow. And so all of our focus is around how do we help the typical private school owner operate their school like a sophisticated institution. So what Cometa does is we automate collections, we help them with their online store, so monetize new channels, and then optimize their admissions and re-enrollment processes so that they can actually grow the student body. And in terms of the product itself, we provide a portal for parents to manage all their payments, invoices, student management, and an administrative dashboard so that admins can create their workflows, automate their work, and then owners can actually see their school's performance, their financial performance in real time.
Yes. So two things I want to start out first is I know when we first met and obviously doing research, you guys started with collections. Why? I mean, I know that is like the financial backbone. You need to collect, you need to make sure you collect on the revenue that you've generated. But why there? And why did you think that was the wedge into these private schools? And from my understanding, there's like over 30,000 of them just in Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. So collections is the most mission critical thing you can do, at least for this type of client. Probably for most industries, payments is the most mission critical. Is just where the money comes from, right? So The academic side might be the brain of the school, but the payment side is the heart of the school. And the moment that heart stops pumping, you see that. So I'm happy to go into a little bit later, how we got to this idea. But going back to your question, no one was cracking the code on how to do collections properly, right? And we wanted to start with the hardest problem first. Why? Because we felt that would give us the right to win to expand into other products later. So how we got there, in terms of actually building the product was, we had actually just started with the most bare minimum thing you could think of, which is a payment portal for parents, and then the admin dashboard was something that we as founders were doing constantly for the school. Over time, we've now been able to expand that product from a collections product to a suite of services that help schools collect money, grow, all the things I mentioned before. But it was really, really important to get that right to win first.
And keep it very simple at first. So sharing a little bit and without getting too into this, most of these schools are owned by some type of one or two group of individuals, potentially legacy, family owned, past generations. And maybe it's too much to say, but blatantly say like maybe not the most financially literate or technologically savvy. So what was the wedge to get in there? And when you guys were building the product, was it really important to keep it simple because then they don't want to use it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So these school owners they tend to be very, very passionate about the academic side, right? So they're generally former educators, and it's rare that you'll see a school owner that's actually an operator and administrator. Sometimes they're very good and they learn on the job. Others might get the education for it, but a lot of them are just making it up as you go. There's no playbook to be a school owner, right? At least not yet, and that's what we're trying to like exactly. To answer your question, how do you actually get your foot in the door today? I mean, it's a brutal market to sell to. When we first started, we were the only venture-backed startup in this space. Now there's a couple others, but more importantly, and what we tend to face off against is hyper local dynamics, right? So you don't have national providers or even like LATAM wide legacy players. There are a few, but it's a lot of local players and local providers that schools tend to trust as like a trusted member of that community, right? So these products are extremely outdated, but the schools trust them. So how do you get your foot in the door? You have to build that trust, right? And going back to the Duolingo thing, you have to invest in a lot of strategies that don't return an immediate CAC payback. You have to be top of mind at the right moment. You have to truly care about their problems. I think these schools are very good at sensing who's selling them something versus who actually is there to help them and understands very, very deeply their pain. So I give Andres a lot of credit here. He's really good at this. He's figured out a ton of our initial go-to-market playbooks that we use today. Generally, what we do is we try to build ourselves as a thought leader. We try to become the best friend of every school owner. Not all of these school owners need a collection solution today. Some of them have been locked into a 3-year contract, but over time, what we're seeing is, when the time comes, they come knocking at our door, and of course we're always knocking on theirs, right? So that's like a quick summary of how we've been able to do it.
And yeah, and you mentioned a little about the profile, and you said Andres is faster this go to market, but a lot of industries here, as I've observed, I was talking to Jaime from Savento, it's like super fragmented. It's like there's not these large ownership groups. So when you're thinking of 30,000 schools, how did you guys, or maybe you could share a glimpse of what Andres thought, think about the actual go to market? Is it really on the boots on the ground, like going in, meeting in person, or did you slowly figure out, okay, I can do this virtually, come to conventions, host some type of activations? How? Where do you start? I just asked like a whole nother episode of go to market in Mexico.
It is so tough. Like I mentioned before, these schools are not deprived of technology as much as you think they are. A lot of them choose not to use it, and that's a whole different thing. But they get bombarded by local providers for LMSs and SISs and CRMs and whatever. So you can't just like adopt a simple cold prospecting playbook and hope that you're going to stand on the market. But you also can't, create a fancy website and a product-led growth channel and just hope that people are going to. Exactly. So the best growth tactic is, we visit schools nonstop. We hear their problems. We evangelize the tactics that we see are working in the space, and we just are constantly there telling schools like, this is the best way you could run your school. We had to experiment with a lot of different tactics, and we of course continue to do so. So we had to build that mindset within the sales team. There's an experimentation culture here. Like we need to embrace failure. We need to know what's working. And then when we see that, we just double down, double down, double down. And it's painfully hard because there's no silver bullet. But I feel like we've set the foundation. So for example, we'll run events around the country. We create a lot of content for schools that tend to complement what we're pitching in these events. And the combination of these things and a few others, like having a close group of schools that are just constantly spreading the word of mouth, tends to create that snowball effect that we're seeing today.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a quick way to cut on one of the thoughts I was going to ask is what was the background and initiative and purpose for this, I think 2024 educational, I guess you'd say report of Mexico? What was the thought process and what was the expected outcome? And do you continue to do this? I remember we talked, you were like, hey, Mac, do you have anybody to maybe could help with this? It takes a lot of time, right?
It takes, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
We're building out the this year's report right now, and yeah, it's a huge investment. It's one of those just if you think about like rocks and pebbles, like this is the big rock that we have to take on, and we do it because it makes a difference, right? Going back to what I said before, there's no playbook to be a school owner. We're trying to create that playbook, right? So we did this first time 2 years ago, so we're moving into our third year. What was the impetus? Hearing a lot of school owners say, I don't really know what other school owners are doing, right? So we said, why don't we collect that data? And there are some more traditional legacy media companies that do these interviews, and they block you from actually getting the access to the data unless if you pay a monstrosity to get access to. And we said, we'll make this free. Like we'll interview or we'll survey as many schools as we can. And we're going to try to do the best analysis we can. At the end of the day, what we want is for you to just learn. And we're not monetizing this, that's not the goal here. We just want to make sure school owners are getting, a sense of what their competition is seeing. And we also want to make it feel a little bit less competitive. I think what we see a lot in the market is school owners can be quite reserved, closed off on sharing their information. We're trying to lower that barrier and say, hey, look, like we can all win here if we actually share what's working in the industry.
Yeah, the way I hear that from you is this ability to build a community and brand is super challenging, especially like when you're thinking B2B, like educational software. Like it's not the sexiest thing, right? But it's like trying to find ways to make it organic but not feel forced. And I think this is a good one.
Exactly.
So moving through this and so forth, I thought I'd ask you this, and you do have a really strong product background. How do you approach simplicity with functionality with so many different stakeholders, the administrators, you're dealing with the SAT, you're dealing with the parents, but also I know you're sophisticated and you want to build more product in the Cometa suite. How do you balance this?
Yeah, it's tough because schools are a lot more demanding and require a lot more customization than we ever expected at the beginning. It's one of those things where you say we're just going to build a payment portal and this is that, and every school has the same collections process, and that could not be further from the truth. So you can get so overwhelmed with customization requests and personalization requests, and what we see is that a lot of companies in the industry tend to say yes to them, right? And yeah, and you create these Frankensteins over time. So, Valeria, my co-founder, and I, we always are just debating on product. And when we hired her, we asked our networks, who's the best designer. People, all like three different people said, Valeria, you have to talk to her. So she's so
So I should
smart.
have had
And
her, not you. I'm kidding. No,
I
I'm
didn't
giving
want
you a
to
hard
say
time.
anything
Yeah,
until you
yeah,
invited
yeah,
me.
yeah.
But we see product in such a similar vein, and it's really helpful there because we both have this mindset of the product culture we're building is a bit anti-sales request, but it's not anti-sales, right? It's just we want to make sure we're enabling B2B, but we want to make sure that we're differentiating ourselves from the competition. So the main difference between Cometa and our competition, because there's a
Mhm.
lot of competitors that say they do something similar, is that competitors digitalize schools chaos, right? If a school has a broken workflow, providers will often build a solution to serve exactly that workflow and 15 others that they're seeing, and it just doesn't actually feel sleek or clean or anything like that. And we try our best not to do that. We elevate schools operations. So we really push our customers to fundamentally rethink how they operate. A sales request comes in, or maybe a support request or account manager says, hey, blah, 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 we need this. We always ask, challenge the customer what the underlying problem is. And what's been really cool is seeing how that product culture is permeating in the company. It's no longer just, the PM asking that question or a founder asking that question, but it's also now the salesperson doesn't have to think twice. They're asking that question themselves. The account manager is asking that question itself. And what often you'll see is that we can actually help these schools change their processes for the better, and help that be both an enabler for the sale, an enabler for the onboarding process, and then of course for the product itself, because you're not just bombarded with a bunch of random gadgets along the way.
Yeah, and that's a balance, right? Because you're paying they're a paying customer, maybe their true workflow is not optimized. But how do
Mhm.
you say do this without them saying, "Well, who are you?" and canceling, right? Yeah, and the churn goes up. So how do you think of listening, and then how do you think of deliberately not choosing to build products? So name a couple of examples of some things that in the beginning you're like, you know what, we knew we didn't need to do this, but it was a lot of
Yeah.
requests.
Yeah, so we didn't get to the ideation at the beginning of Cometa. I'm happy to come back to that, but there was a point where we had considered factoring, for example, right? And then there was a decision point where we said, we're not going to do this anymore. And we did have schools ask us for factoring. And as I mentioned before, like we want to elevate the schools process. We don't feel that factoring, or we didn't feel at the time that factoring would help a school towards the mission of, operating more sophisticated. And so we tell schools, if you want factoring, go to so and so competitor. And if you really want to elevate how you work, we'll help you get there. And almost always they go with us, right? And how do you do that? I mean, you can't bulldoze a client. We're not mistreating them. We're not ignoring them. We're listening to them. We're really thinking through. We ask the right questions. We are negotiating with them. Sometimes we do take on a feature request that makes a lot of sense, and we celebrate when that happens because it's great. You accelerate your learning. So it's not about having ego with the customer. It's about helping them. And then I think the greatest thing is when you find customers that can see 2 years ahead, right? The customers that are saying, I want, X product, and we say, that's on the roadmap. How do I get you in the door now so that you can help me build that product a year from now, right?
Yeah, and that gets into this like vertical integrated solutions have always been like very, I don't know, sexy and attractive here, right? Because once
Yeah.
you're in, you can keep going up or down. How do you guys think of that without being too far out, without being so short-sighted? Is there a balance? Have you changed that in the last 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, it's a great question. We change it probably every 6 months, in terms of the product vision of how we get there. So vertically integrated solutions are fantastic for a variety of reasons, but it's also very overwhelming because there's just so much to build and so much that a school wants. A lot of it just comes to, first principles thinking and systems thinking, So the first couple of years, we knew we wanted to build 15 other products, but we said we need to make sure we have that right to win. So a lot of it's like thinking in phases, right? So phase one was just build the best collections product in Mexico. We're not in LATAM today, but I believe we're also probably the best collections product in LATAM as well. And we knew there was going to be a phase two. And we would constantly tell the team, more or less, it's going to be this timeline. Just wait, just wait, just wait. And that timeline has begun. Now we're in phase two. Now we're building into new products. And so there's a lot of different phases along the way that we follow. We have an internal playbook that we want to follow, and it tends to be the playbook you'll hear from other vertical companies. So when you look at Toast, for example, in the US, they don't just do point of sale and lending. They do everything a restaurant needs, and they actually started with the kitchen side before they built any Toast Capital, for example. So we think very similar to a company like Toast. The growth of a school is not going to come exclusively from financial operations. It also comes from the day-to-day of running a school. And so we have to think in phases of, well, how do you get there? And it's important to time box that to the team and say, right now we're in this new phase, and your role here is to help us, get more control points,
We'll
get
get
more
there,
schools
but
going.
here now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to this concept of continuous learning, right? What was something that maybe was counterintuitive that you thought as you guys were growing, product side or the team side, that was dead wrong and at the school was maybe better than you thought at this option?
This is such a good question. The first one, and I already mentioned this, is that schools are not deprived of technology. They have vendors knocking on their door constantly. I think probably the second one is that, I alluded to this a little bit, but these schools are very demanding. And, you think about, we solve a delinquency problem with the collections product, but a lot of these schools really do live day to day and week to week and month to month. And so the impact of getting something wrong there is so enormous. And when we've seen that our collections does not reduce delinquency when we expected it to, or if something got misconfigured and a payout went a day later than it should have, those things have a real impact. And so I mentioned collections is mission critical, and I think that sounds really fancy in a PowerPoint. It's the reality for probably 90% of schools in Mexico, where if you don't have that money tomorrow, they're not going to be able to pay their teachers, payroll, or their provider, or whatever it might be. And so I think it's actually been quite a testament to these schools in their financial engineering pre-Cometa, how they were able to make this happen before, because now we're giving them all this data, we're automating the whole process, and we're making sure it's like more efficient. But schools were somehow surviving pre. Of course, when the pandemic happened, that was a big, hit. And that's what revealed all of the problems of maybe the work they were doing before, not actually doing it the right way, maybe, but it really is day to day, week to week money.
Yeah. And going back to the product side on just touching on this, when you first started to mention, and maybe you actually alluded to this, they're actually more technologically enabled and savvy than one might think. What were some of the hardest processes manually that you had to rebuild within the product suite of Cometa?
Rebuild for the school or
For the
rebuild
school, for the
for
school, correct.
okay, rebuild for
Yeah.
the school. Yeah, I mean, I think we rebuild a lot. I think there's a lot of legacy providers that provide some sort of SIS and they have a collections module. And the reality is no one adopts it because it's not an ideal experience. I don't want to say that word, but yeah, yeah. It's maybe not the most user friendly. I think it's really important to realize your client's client is the parent, right? So we're selling to schools, but ultimately you need to make the parent's experience delightful. And a lot of what we rethink in terms of the processes that a school has today is how do we get more power in the control of the parent and actually reduce workload for the school in the process, make the data more accurate, whatever it might be, right? So a lot of it was that mindset shift for the school. A lot of schools say, I've got all this data on our parents, let's onboard. And we say, actually, we don't want that data. On the onboarding process, we're going to actually ask the parents again to give us that data. And it might feel a little counterintuitive to the school, but we know that in doing so, we're actually going to clean a lot of information that maybe the school didn't have correct the first time. So, I'm talking very high level, but that's an example of how we approach so much of what we do. So I'll give a very specific example in invoicing, right? So invoicing was something that the schools used to collect all the information at the beginning of the school year. They would say to the parents, give me your like who's going to be invoiced for which sorts of products or which students, upload this here, whatever, or just give me the paper. And then every time a parent paid, they'd have to invoice manually, right? And so what we do now is we just say to the parent in the onboarding process and throughout the payment process, you can change your invoicing data whenever you want. They configure whenever. And so easy. And now a school doesn't have to think twice. Even if a parent still wants to go to the school to pay, the invoicing we'll do ourselves. The school does not have to touch any of that. So that's one example of many of where we just say, let's remove the school from the equation. We'll just let the parent figure it out. And it makes things a lot more efficient.
Gotcha. Last couple thoughts here. We haven't even touched on this. Cometa, I'm sure the monetization model maybe I stayed the same or evolved. How is it? Is there an upsell product? Is there a basic standard plan? Is there a SaaS and then also like some transaction fee?
Yeah, so we monetize both SaaS and payments, and it's on purpose for two reasons. The software side is important because we don't want schools to think of us as a payment processor. So it's more of a positioning reason. And then payments is really directly correlated to the value we provide. So we want to make sure this doesn't hurt for the school when they're actually paying for us. And it's a win-win because we only monetize when parents pay through us. So if a parent wants to keep paying at the school in cash or something like that, and the school's willing to accept that, we'll still help the school in a variety of other ways, but it is something that we want to make sure the school is actually encouraging. And the reason why for the school it's beneficial is because they just save so much work not having to process the payment and the invoice, et cetera. So yeah, go. Yeah, well, yeah. So that's the monetization model today. You asked about upselling. That's not really our focus right now. Our focus is more about getting deeper into the school, more control points, and then of course growing into more schools. But there will be a point where our focus shifts and we enter that new phase of monetization of
Yeah,
products.
it's really K through 12 private schools. Is the product or is the value different from, I don't know, elementary or primary versus high school? Is there nuances or is it really the same offering?
It's a good question. It's the same offering. It becomes different when you look at generally more like pre-K kinder or university. And a lot of these segments come to us and ask us to work with them. But it is important to have an ICP and be focused. So I'll give an example. A university has the student paying instead of the parent a lot of the time, right? And so that creates a fundamentally very different dynamic. Their school cycles are different. There's a whole lot of things. We can build that stuff, and we have built a lot of things that help universities use Cometa or pre-K use Cometa. But the reality is, it's so important in product to be very precise with how you want to solve a problem. And if you start building for everybody, your main core customer will feel it, will know it, and you just lose that seamlessness that you had before. So, that's the main difference between how we operate. But primary to high school tends to be quite similar. I think one other difference that's interesting is that a lot of high schools in Mexico have universities associated or vice versa. So it's like where do you draw the line? And
Yeah,
that's always a little
that's
small.
that's hard. It's a
Yeah,
nuance, right?
exactly.
So looking back now, the inception story, we could jumped over it, but the vision from the founding team, and I know you guys have added Valeria, has it changed at all? And in what way it has and what way it hasn't?
Yeah. Do you mind if I actually tell a little bit of how we got to
Yeah, of
the
course.
mission
No,
vision?
of
Yeah,
course.
because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think that
Yeah,
gives
that'd be
good
important.
context.
Yeah.
And then I'll answer your
Yeah.
question. Or actually, I'll start with the question first. So
Whatever you
the
want.
mission the mission has always been the same, and then the vision is, or the product vision is how is what's changed over time. So, I always ask founders, what problem are you solving, not what's your idea, because everyone pitches an idea, but that idea is going to grow and evolve, but the problem area is the one that will probably stay the same if you're really passionate. So, you have to start with a mission. You think deeply about, well, in order to solve that mission, what problems do I need to solve? You go to the solutions, and then over time you're going to iterate that. So, in our case, we always started with a very clear mission of, we're going to increase access to quality education in Latin America. And why? Because of the education backgrounds. We also firmly believe that most problems in LATAM stem in some way or another from a lack of access to quality education. So then we had to think about, well, what problems are occurring there, right? And we started in the pandemic. It became very clear to us pretty early on what private schools were suffering from at the time. And so that helped us get to where we are, or where we were 2 years ago, which was, we're going to help schools with their financial operations to help them operate and grow. But over time, that vision has expanded and improved and become more refined. Like I said, every 6 months we tend to reevaluate, are we headed in the right direction? So our vision today is no longer financial operations. It's how do we become the operating system for the school? We believe that that's what's going to help us actually achieve the mission that we have at Cometa.
Do you think starting during the pandemic was actually really beneficial to you? Maybe if you started Cometa 2 years before, it maybe would have seen as valuable. I maybe could say from my perspective, it might have been amazing timing.
It's amazing timing, and also at the same time, you have to ask yourself, well, what are you solving for here? So, for example, if you look at Isaac in Brazil, and I know that's not the exact pronunciation in Portuguese, but I'd rather not butcher it. They do a revenue guarantee, and that works really well in their region. So, and it works really well in the pandemic because a lot of these schools were experiencing huge delinquency problems in the pandemic. They grew like crazy in the pandemic, and then over time, I think what happened was that need went down, and then they had to expand into other products, right? So in some ways, it's a blessing and a curse to start in that time. For us, it was very helpful because what it was it was like a brick fell, through a window, and you could just see so clearly what is actually going on in this industry. And I alluded to this earlier, but schools were doing a lot of financial or administrative engineering to make their business just barely operate. The moment you added in that brick and the glass started, you could see everything is broken, right? And so for schools, it became this big wake up call of 1/3 of all schools in Mexico are closing. I just lost a lot of students. My neighbors are closing. What do I need to do to change that? And then that's where Cometa came in and was able to pick up some steam.
Adding this in, and I thought it was good. I got this inspiration just now. How do you think of WhatsApp and the power of WhatsApp for you guys, right? Because you guys are B2B, but the end user is this parent and everybody uses WhatsApp. I'm still blown away by like how everybody is obsessed with this here. In some ways it's
Yeah.
good, in some ways it's just nonsense. How do you guys integrate WhatsApp? And has that been important to you? Has that been important in the way you're like, hey, how do I make this the simplest way for the user to pay a tuition payment?
Yeah, it's very core, and at the same time, you can't fully put all your eggs in one basket. So, for example, all of our interactions with parents are through WhatsApp, and we actually have a WhatsApp group with every school we launch, which is probably pretty unique. And the founders are bombarded all day with messages and requests and questions, and that's okay because it just helps you be so close. Like, can you imagine the U.S. having that opportunity? Like maybe a
Wow. That
Slack group? I don't know. Yeah,
No, I
yeah,
was thinking the opposite. I'm like, wow, that is true. But then all of
yeah.
a sudden you have 1,000 messages to read every Monday.
Exactly, and you just hit, as quickly as you can through the WhatsApp groups. But and then if you can add some AI in there, then you get a ton of insights. But so anyway, it's really positive, and we do bet a lot on WhatsApp, but we don't want our entire business to be dependent on WhatsApp because you never know what change WhatsApp will make. Like they recently made some changes that make it harder to market to people, right? So imagine if all of our marketing within the parent side was through WhatsApp, like we would have to change a lot. So we do invest a lot in having real estate, both mental and visual, with the school and with the parent. But we do want to make sure WhatsApp is a core part of our experience.
Gotcha. Last thing before we go to the next set here. You guys raised a Series A last year, I think in the fall, of $12 million with prominent investors Kazakh, Reach Capital, Homebrew, Accrue Capital, Latitude. I mean, to say the least, it's pretty impressive cap table, especially in Mexico and maybe in the US as well. How was this fundraising process? I know you've been close to it ever since Rapid SOS. What are you most excited about having some of these investors on your cap table?
Yeah, so it's interesting, but in both rounds, we've been preempted. We had basically investors tell us we're ready for you before we were ready for them. And some founders might not like that. I think not every startup needs to raise capital, but for us, it was so important to have partners that just really believed in us and great minds that challenge you. So for us, it feels like a safe space where we can really think through ideas and have people that have seen this 15, 20, 50 times, whatever it might be, and help us think about it from a different perspective. Oh, we have a portfolio company that does the exact same thing or had the same problem in hospitals, et cetera. So that was always really important to us to bring partners close. And we haven't necessarily gone for the highest term sheets in these processes. Both rounds we had more interesting offers financially, but we went with other partners. I would recommend any founder that wants to raise to work with the ones that we have today. Reach, Kazakh, Homebrew, Latitude have been with us since day zero. And each one of them have stepped up in very, very powerful ways. Esteban and Mariana are on our board, but Satya and Hunter from Homebrew and the Latitude team have been just fantastic. And A Crew, recently joined in the Series A. They were a new investor, and Matri and Lauren have just such deep vertical SaaS experience, so they got it from the get go. We gave one pitch, and they knew exactly where we were headed, and it started becoming us interviewing them versus them interviewing us in the process, because we were just so fascinated about the ideas they had to offer.
So it's kind of like last couple of things here. Just more about the Mexico ecosystem in general when it comes to education, really in the private sector, because we're not going into the public sector. Why do you think financial operations and education have been neglected? It's probably a broader question, but for you, really specifically in Mexico, and you could tie in Latin America.
Yeah, so if you take a step back, I mean, fintech only gained steam in the last decade, and you probably needed the big players like Nubank and Zeppelin to go for huge markets, pretty horizontal products, to then open the way for the niche products, right? So then Cometa is going very niche now in education. We're tackling a lot of different things beyond just fintech for education. I don't think financial operations in education has been neglected necessarily. If you look at Brazil, Edubank and Isaac started that market, and then there was a lot of investment in Brazil. And in Mexico, it was the same. We raised our Series A in early 2022, and then a couple other companies followed after. I do tend to think that these markets are very big, but it's also a lot more interesting when there's a winner take all, and these will probably become winner take all markets.
I was gonna say, like, do we think this is a winner take all or no?
We do, we really do. I think that we're happy to have partners along the way that'll help us get there. But to become an operating system, you want to become a big player. And I think that a lot of our decisions, kind of like the Duolingo thing I referenced earlier, we're always thinking about the long term. We're always thinking about where we got to be in 10 years. So that's our intent.
Kind of final thoughts here. Just one, couple quick hits. You can hit on them. When you think of your product, what are you most proud of to date?
When you say that, do you mean
Product feature,
features?
really
Features.
feature.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Probably the first feature that we built that was very, let's say, different to what a school was used to, and really actually contributed to the let's help you operate like a sophisticated institution, was a report that one of our team members invented called the delinquency efficiency report. So the reason I love it is because it was, first of all, is entirely born bottoms up. No founder involvement in there, and I think that that's the type of culture we're trying to create. Yeah, and secondly, how this person found it was he and his squad were interviewing schools. They talked to the most advanced schools, and they kept seeing two or three schools talk about this just crazy advanced report with color coding and all that, like for conditional ranges and all that. And what you realize was these guys are sophisticated, like they know what they're doing. And then we decided, well, what if we gave this to small schools or medium sized schools? And every school owner we showed it to was like, brain exploded. So it's like giving an SMB, exactly. We'll figure it out, and it's like giving an SMB, like something like a bank's finance team would be looking at. So it's a very advanced report, very easy to understand, and we think that it's adding a lot of value to
Yeah,
school owners.
and it goes back to what you said earlier. How do you build something simplicity, but also a lot of complexity?
Yeah,
It's an art.
exactly.
What does success look like in 10 years from now for Cometa?
We imagine a world where any school owner, no matter where in LATAM, no matter their background, academic or administrative, can open and grow a school thanks to Cometa. And I think a bigger success, a next step beyond that, would be thinking beyond LATAM, thinking globally. But we do like to stay grounded with where we're going. Yeah.
When I was researching Cometa, it's kite in Spanish. Is there more meaning behind this? Is there a reason why a kite's so symbolic for you guys?
Yes, a kite is somewhat infantile. It's the connection to the students. It's also a comet. Our logo is both a comet and a kite, and the word is both as well. So we like both associations. Heading upwards, lifting. It's what we want to achieve for schools, and it's a little clever because it's also co-meta, so collaborating with schools to get to their goals, right? Um, At the end, yeah, it took us a long time to get there. Probably, yeah, it probably took us more time than we would have liked because at the end of the day, you pick a name and then
Yeah, you go
everyone in
for
the
it.
market
Yeah,
just,
figures it
accepts it.
out.
But
You mentioned someone who's had a big impact on you before, your former founder and CEO at Rapid SOS. Is there anybody else that's had a huge impact on your career?
two people, and they're people I try to go back to as much as I can when I have product or founder level questions. But one is Jorge Mazal. So he is the ex-CPO of Duolingo. I only worked with him briefly, but he was somebody that just, I gave him a 15-minute pitch of Cometa and he said, I'm in, how can I help? Like it was just so immediate. And to have somebody of that caliber, working with you from day zero was incredibly helpful, especially for, first time founders. So that was somebody I'm always going to be indebted to and grateful for. And then the other one is Andre Safuncic and actually, and Brendo Vasquez, who I've worked with in Lumos. Both of them are probably the best storytellers I've ever met. And I think storytelling is a really key founder skill. So I try to emulate what I learned both in product and on the marketing or storytelling side from them.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Mateo. That's a wrap on this episode of Cut the Check, presented by VCMX. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and leave a review. It really helps more founders and investors discover the show. You can find me on LinkedIn at MacMeyer or check out my website at macmeyer.com for more insights on startups, venture capital, and the Latin America ecosystem. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next week.